Welcome to Happy Times and Places. I mean, it's quite happy, but we do have this security guy who'll do anything for money. But other than that, it's a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, watch a Doctor Who story chosen by a friend of mine and then have to guess what their favourite thing about each episode might be.
Hello, Toby. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Tom, and I'm an associate professor specialising in popular music. Today, I'm recommending The Keeper of Traken.
Welcome, everybody, to this happy time and place, like the grove on Traken, where, well, I don't know, winter's icy grip has got a hold, and there's limited daylight currently there to up serotonin levels. So, if I'm not careful, I will just calcify with all my evil thoughts buzzing around my head. So I've been for a run today, and I feel much better. It's annoying, isn't it, that all those things they say, if you eat well and exercise, you'll feel better. Especially as the seasons get... It's Doctor Who weather, though, isn't it? I mean, this is the sort of weather I associate with Doctor Who. Watching it as a youth, when in those days when you had to watch things when a scheduler decided. But this was, February, wasn't it? February 1981, so not quite as dark and as cold as it currently is as I record in November 2024, but I certainly feel the change of seasons does knock one slightly. So I've been a bit I've been a bit subdued, and I've not attended to as many things as well I might. So I'm recording this just as I've released part 1 of The Keeper of Traken onto Patreon, which means we do have some comments from some listeners, which have gone down rather well, and I think add different perspectives, but all in a spirit of joy. And so they'd give a delightful new dimension, I think. So I'll go through those. Alex Kapajoglu says, The Keeper of Traken is a very special story for me. It was the first story I recorded on VHS, and therefore the story I've owned the longest. It would have been full circle, but I missed episode 3. It was from the summer repeat in 1981, the one with the 5 faces announcement at the end of part 4, which would absolutely have been my choice as favourite part of that episode if I were choosing, but I guess that would be cheating. Do you know what? I mean, I'm sure I would have watched that, because I do remember watching Keeper of Traken again, but I don't remember that announcement. But now that you mention it, that's triggered something in vaguely lurking in the back of one of my darkened synapses. I love those things that we have memories that aren't just the programme, but about an announcement for a forthcoming repeat season, and such things where it's like somebody had just casually mentioning that the Dead Sea Scrolls had just washed up on the shore. So I'm not surprised that stuck with you, although it didn't stick with me if I did see it. But as I say, I have a vague memory of it now. Lots of lovely nostalgic vibes for me with this one, Alex. And I love that, because that's less about the story itself and more about the stuff that surrounds it. And of course, that's what Doctor Who is. It's about more than what happens in between the opening titles and the closing titles. Andrew Llewellyn says, Keeper has always been a top-tier story for me since I first saw it back in 1981. Surrounded by other baffling, pretentious pseudo-science stories that make up Season 18, only this and Full Circle stood out as proper Doctor Who. Melka was creepy and a good introduction for Nyssa. Brilliant. Well, I assume you're not sending a postcard to one at C.H. Bidmead. I can see that I too found a lot of Season 18 rather baffling, whereas the target books I was reading were much easier to follow. You know, I think Season 18 has its eye on other things. You could say pretentious, you could say pseudoscience. I mean, as I revisited them, I was like, oh, well, perhaps they're being properly scientific. But of course, now that I'm not a scientist, but actual scientists have looked at these stories and said, no, the science is rubbish. But it's at least making it's making an attempt to say, we're doing science properly by using a variation on the words that Doctor Who uses. I don't know how I feel like this. I don't care if it's particularly scientific, but maybe if it's carrying itself as if it is scientific, perhaps then it should be. Or is it just a different, it's just a more elaborate disguise, really? But does that make it therefore pretentious? A more elaborate, I don't know. I sort of now, as I'm a bit older, I like the fact that it's at least going, well, we're in comparison to season 17, which took some liberties with the fourth wall, I would say. At least season 18 is sort of going, well, this we're going to behave as if everything that we're talking about is actually possible. I mean, it's all a conjuring trick, isn't it? It's just as the magician in season 17 is probably on the end of a pier and is telling blue jokes, whereas the one for season 18 is probably more of a sort of David Copperfield who stares at you very intensely and probably charges top dollar, but is still at the heart of it a cheap conjurer. In retrospect, says Kevin Ashleford, the Keeper of Traken is notable in that it introduces 3 significant recurring characters into the Doctor Who universe. There's Nyssa, of course. We get our first glimpse of Anthony Ainley's Master. And last but not least, there's Geoffrey Beevor's Master, who, whilst having little screen time on the TV series as a Peter Pratt replacement, has nonetheless become the go-to classic Who Master for Big Finish, as well as narrating numerous BBC audiobooks. And quite right too, because my God, he's got such a good voice. And yes, using Geoffrey has been a master stroke and given that incarnation of the Master another lease of life. And I mean, Geoffrey has just an enviable voice, and he can make it turn. He's a charming man, but he can make it turn evil with great ease, and what wonderful modulation he has, and diction too. He's a great voice actor. Well, a great actor, full stop. But his voice is a fine instrument and perfectly suited to audio mastery. If I was to choose, continues Kevin Ashleford, one favourite thing from episode 1 of The Keeper of Traken, it would have to be the opening sequence in the TARDIS. I love how the Keeper simply pops in to kickstart the story. The interaction between the Fourth Doctor and Adric works surprisingly well, with a camaraderie that the Fifth Doctor and Adric never manage, despite Tom Baker's well-documented hostility to the character off-camera. And we get to spend some quality time in the TARDIS. Until JNT, this was rare. Season 18 uses the TARDIS interior well. That's very true. When I think of season 18 and actually season 19 as well, I do think of people sort of wandering up and down the corridors of the TARDIS, and they certainly try to expand the sort of relationships and interaction between the characters who are regulars and the existing set. I find the opening scene in episode 1 quite charming because it's quite unusual. It is a bit sort of on the nose exposition-y. I did discuss this last time, but it is also nice to see moments where it's just Tom Baker and Adric, which are relatively rare when one considers the whole of the series. And they do. I think they do have a quite a fun dynamic between them, and it's one that when it's just the two of them is again sort of rare fruit. So yes, I do quite, even though it's got sort of lots of elements I would normally shrink from. I want to get out of the TARDIS and I want to get into the adventure, and I'm not wild about on the nose exposition. I do think it is quite charming that they go, no, we'll have the Doctor and Adric talking, and we'll just have this geezer turn up and fill you in. And it's a way of doing it. Anthony Carroll says, the first season I watched as a proper fan. Liked Traken at the time, loved Master being back and the Melker, but it is too theatrical, but good world building. Short, and to the point, I can't, yeah. I don't mind theatrical, but I can see it is quite theatrical. Adam Parkin says, my main childhood memory of this one is reading the Target novelisation. I don't remember what age I was when I first saw it. Yes, well, that's a lot of us, isn't it, Adam, that actually we come to the TV stories via different means, whereas generally, well, I suppose obviously because everything is new now, the TV is the way in. But I love the fact that we all have our different and similar stories about how we came to the show. But of course, then we each have our own individual approaches to each individual story. So each story means something different to each and every one of us because of the unique way that Doctor Who exists within our own individual lives. And I never tire of that stuff, because we have some things that are amazing coincidences that link us with a particular story. But for some stories will never quite be right because they happened at this time, or because you had a bad experience when you were watching them, or whatever. And some stories you'll always love, even though if on your return to them you might go, actually, in the cold light of day, but nonetheless, because you were with that person you love, or under that circumstance, or it was particularly bright light on a dark day or whatever, you're never gonna hold anything against it. And I love that, and that's going to be a difference for somebody. That's Underworld. You know what I mean? And Siobhan Galichon says, not about the story, but we love Dr. Tom, who is the special guest who you heard at the top of this episode, who will be giving his favourite thing about episode 2 of The Keeper of Traken at the end of this episode. Amazing musician, says Siobhan. Seriously, look for his stuff. Man, that dude can sing them. Siobhan, that's all very modern language for me. That dude. But I know nothing about music, but Tom is an amazing musician. And, on paper as well as in performance, because he's a doctor of music. So he can walk the walk, talk the talk, and sing the singing. And probably accompany it on an instrument too. So let's see what Tom has to say about episode 2 once I've done, the main work of watching it. And as I am going to fire this up on iPlayer, all I can say at the time of recording is thank goodness that The Keeper of Traken wasn't written by Robert Banks Stewart, because I've been saying a lot of times recently, isn't it delightful? Who'd have thought that at the touch of the button we can get all of Doctor Who on BBC, and then gradually episodes disappear? First, that when they came for An Unearthly Child, I said nothing. Well, I didn't, but what I said is, and who I said it about is unrepeatable. When they came for The Terror of the Zygons and The Seeds of Doom, I said nothing. And when they come for me, people go, he's not on iPlayer anyway. And then, so nobody will notice. Right. Episode 2 of The Keeper of Traken. I am going to start watching it in 3, 2, 1. So yes, I do associate this season with cold winter nights, and so it's appropriate that I'm watching this during one. I do remember part 3 of the repeat. I think I said last time I was at, I can't remember. I remember being at my friend Paul Sykes's house, who lived down the road, when part 3's repeat was on. And I'm pretty sure I watched, but I remember where I was when I watched the end of part 4 for the first time. Then I think for the second time they meld into one because it's the same action. So here we go. So for episode 1, I voted for Traken itself and just the whole vibe and feel of the planet, which I think is special to this particular story. And I did like the build up to the to this cliffhanger, even though it does rely on the keeper speaking like people speak in television, which is never quite getting to the point. One of my favourite things is when somebody who's about to die tells you what you need to know, but using a metaphor or in some sort of code, rather than going, the villain is the Minister of Defence. Instead goes, look for the nun's habit in the wardrobe. And the wardrobe turns out to be the name of a pub. A nun's habit turns out to be a code name for the minister's secretary or something like that. I'm intrigued by the Foster's hair. Presumably they're bald caps, unless the thing went out on Spotlight saying, is anybody going... Nobody really goes bald from the top quite like that anymore. I love John Woodnutt. He's and Margot van der Burg was in the Aztecs, which I wouldn't have known at the time. I remember when I discovered that when I was reading about the Aztecs that Margot van der Burr was in Keeper of Traken, which I'd seen. I was annoyed that I hadn't soaked it in. This bit's not very good. I don't know what Sheila Ruskin is aiming for there. Now that doesn't help that she has to do a slightly theatrical fall, because these days you'd cut away. She'd probably have knee guards, and there'd be an out of shot mattress, so you could do a more sort of convincing fall, if you like. But it's the fact that she does that thing with her hands as well before doing a very sort of theatrical fall, and that whole thing about can't you see with your eyes? I don't know quite what she's going for there. Sheila Ruskin is a fine actress, a beautiful, statuesque actress with fine delivery and good pedigree, and I'm not sure her performance works 100% of the time in The Keeper of Traken. Is what I will say. I mean, there's theatrical, and then there's theatrical, and that eyes thing is it's a weird choice. But look at Robin Soames as Luvic, trying to take it all in, but clearly not understanding a word of it, because he doesn't get much to say. But he's not stopping acting there, and I always appreciate that. But not in a way that draws focus. You have to sort of do the job. You have to be like, appropriate scenery, which takes a bit of effort, because if you don't, that's distracting. Again, this is the sort of thing a non-Who fan would be. Why is he backing away, say no? Why doesn't he run away or attack it or something? And again, it's it's what we get used to, isn't it? With a sort of multi-camera open set, but people don't have that far. That he could, as far as he'd have run in real life, would have got him into Studio 2 or the canteen. Nice lighting though in that darkness. Nice height to that set. I used to love people being zapped with lasers in Doctor Who. It was, to me, what Doctor Who was all about. So very exciting for me. So yeah, Margot van der Burr has been Kameka in the Aztecs, and as I say, when I read about the fact that she was in this, I remember feeling that I, as a young man, had watched somebody in Doctor Who who'd been in earlier Doctor Who, and that to me felt like a sort of connection. I quite like the fact that although Cassia is a baddie, she seems to be motivated by her love for Tremas. It's not entirely logical, because I don't think the plan quite works, in the sense that she's trying to save Tremas, but if the plan works out, it won't be good for Tremas in the long run anyway. But I think there's also a suggestion that she's not doing this entirely of her own free will. She's slightly under the thrall of the Melka. This is very television, isn't it? In these days, you'd probably have a scene of her driving up to the hills and burying the bodies at the top of a mountain or something. But because this is television, where our canvas is smaller, the equivalent of that is to hide the dead bodies behind a plant pot that nobody will find. And again, it's a kind of shorthand, in the same way that when you're watching something on stage, if you see three soldiers in a production of King Lear, and King Lear says, "My army," and they go, "Yeah," you go, "Well, yeah, I see three, but I'm imagining the other 200 behind them." And it's the same as this is the plant pot. The hiding behind the plant pot is sort of shorthand for taking a moment to, when nobody's looking, to go and dig a hole up the top of a hill and bury the body. But everything is condensed in terms of space and time, because, of course, she's done it immediately before they come out, because the story is confined to these environments. I'm loving this lighting. breakfast. I love the fact that the Doctor. There's something about Tom Baker saying breakfast. It's like when he says, "Let's try the pub" in the Android Invasion. He's got a way of just making some words. I want breakfast. When Tom Baker says breakfast, I want breakfast, and I imagine quite a hearty breakfast. And sometimes, because I'm old and fat, I sometimes just have a light fruity breakfast. But when Tom Baker says breakfast, I'm imagining kippers and hot eggs and all sorts. I love Nissa's theme there. I love Nissa's costume too. I fancied Sarah Sutton, but in an innocent way. I was how old was I? I was 7, but I loved her. I certainly don't imagine that breakfast. They look like they've got raw aubergines in the middle of the. Nobody has a raw aubergine for breakfast. But there we go. But yes, Sarah Sutton's Nissa theme was one of the few that were also on that Doctor Who the music that I actually enjoyed as a tune, and I think it's quite appropriate. It does say Nissa to me in musical form. These sets are good, aren't they? I mean, again, they are theatrical, but they're good works. It's a brilliant voice, isn't it? He enjoys his evil. So right, let's get to the bottom of this. Yeah, she doesn't want him to become keeper, but she ultimately becomes keeper, which is just the same as, she's still going to be parted from her husband. I can't remember now if Cassia is as good a name as Tremus is a misquote, isn't it, from Julius Caesar, in which Cassius, not Cassia, says Brutus is just as good a name as Caesar. So I mean, the master's there. I'm sure he's not expecting Cassia to go, Julius Caesar, because of course they don't have Shakespeare on Traken. But it's a nice little thing. It means that I feel a bit pleased with myself for spotting that. The writer probably, Christopher Bidmead probably took their day off. Did Christopher? Well, I think there was a lot of having read the story breakdowns of what this story originally was. It's very, very different from what we finally get. So. And we know that Bidmead is the science guy, but he's also very well read, and he's not alien to the more literary side of things, and he's not, for somebody who's the maths guy. His dialogue can be quite fruity. I love Hugger Mugger. That's going to be very close to being my favourite bit of this episode. I just love the word Hugger Mugger. It's beautiful, and I think it's the only Doctor Who story to feature the word Hugger Mugger. And I love the fact that Seron seems like he's going to be a really important player, even though history spoilers tells us that he doesn't make it beyond this episode. And I like the fact that he kind of sees through all of her, because I think Katura and Luvic are a bit easily led and manipulated, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because Traken has to be this place which is knitted together by kindness and decency, and yet Cassia's poison spreads fairly quickly, although there's an argument there for saying, well, if you don't build up the antibodies to fight the poison, when you do get infected, it does spread very quickly. So okay, I've talked myself into that she is the poison. And I like all of this stuff, this idea of rapport with the keeper. And what I like is that they don't sort of get really bogged down in what it is, but it gives you enough. It gives you enough to know what it is, and again, I don't, seeing as Cassia's the obvious baddie. Now Luvic and Katura haven't seen that, but Seron, I think, is kind of, if he's not onto her, he's certainly sort of got her number. But then she says, "Oh well, I'll watch over you," and he goes, "All right then." But but again, it does kind of win us over by him doing that sort of very sarky, under your watchful eye, I'm sure, whatever it is, justice will be done or protocol will be met. So again, you sort of go, do I buy that? And then there's a nicely written line that has character to it that kind of goes, no, okay, no, I will buy that moment. So, I'm coming into this. I watched this whenever it was a couple of weeks ago, and I've always felt that Cassia sort of is able to spread her poison a little too easy on this planet that's supposed to be sort of lovely and wise. But watching this and bearing in mind I'm missing some stuff because I'm having to talk all the way through it, it's not alarming me as much as it has done in the past. Maybe the way to watch it to paper over its tracks is to do a monologue during it. But of course, a wholly nice, in inverted commas, and I use the word, it's a horrible word, nice, but I choose it deliberately. A nice planet would be cloying and unbelievable. So I suppose the fact that Niemann is a bit of an oily manoeuvrer and Cassia is prone to darkness, and as I say, I suppose that she is, her malignancy spreads because the blood is pure, as it were. I think a lot of it's because Nyssa gets a bracelet in the next story. I do think of this period of Doctor Who as people having things put on them by the Master that sort of control them a little bit. You forget about those, and you think of that as being sort of part and parcel of the furniture of Doctor Who, but actually it's only in this bit and the next. So she. I mean, I like the fact that she is motivated by love for Anthony Ainley, who was quite a character. He's still quite an enigma. I don't know if I mentioned this. It's terrible. My short-term memory is the first to go. But did I talk about Ainley much last time? I once did a radio with a wonderful actor called Jonathan Keeble, who revealed to me that he was on Anthony Ainley's same cricket team as Anthony Ainley. So Keeble and I went for a pint, and I got some right old stories. And I think there are stories to tell about Ainley. He was definitely an eccentric. I'd love the idea of that story that he used to go in and make them put a wig on over his wig. I mean, really, did he do that, or was that? Because I mean, wigs are quite hard, to put things over. And again, as a bald man myself, I do think we laugh now, but I think it is a sign of the times, isn't it, that people would be so ashamed of this natural process that they would carry on this. People live. The idea that somebody has to hide themselves, whatever aspect of themselves. I mean, the more serious ones, their sexuality or whatever. But somebody in need of a wig or a toque. I remember my mum working with somebody called Tone the Toop. He was called Tony. He wore a toque. They called him Tone the Toop. I mean, it never occurred to me. I'm not wild about the fact that I'm a balded man, but not to the extent that I'd ever pretend not to be. That seems yeah. But that just goes to show how society can make people feel self-conscious. I think that's right. I'm glad that that seems to be less of a thing now. Although I'm sure there are people who wear wigs, and I will, I wouldn't berate them or take the piss out of them for so doing. But it seems to me, whereas actually the people on Traken do the opposite. Isn't it ironic? There's loads of actors here who aren't bald, who are pretending to be bald, and Anthony Ainley, the other side of the studio, going, "No, loves, I've got loads of hair. It's a good job I wasn't cast as one of those Fosters. You'd have had to have ploughed through my dense thatch." He's a great character, Proctor Neiman, and I think Roland Oliver is really good as him. He's quite a sort of Shakespearean character as well, or almost Dickensian character, isn't he? The sort of the wily, sort of slightly creepy, self-interested. But that means he's a very useful plot device, and he becomes a very important. He's a more important character really than Katura and Luvic, who, although they're both played by excellent actors and have a great look, don't do much more than offer not particularly useful interventions. But I mean, I think both of them do a good job. I think Margot van der Burg is a very elegant actress, and I think Robin Soanes is great. And I love his little beard with no moustache, his Abraham Lincoln kind of thing. I'd remembered him really well as a character without remembering, well, not as a character. I didn't remember. I hadn't remembered him as being quite so sort of hopeless, but I'd remembered that look. And I remembered being quite pleased that he'd been made keeper at the end, because and then when I came to rewatch it later, you go, oh, but he's hopeless, but there is a little journey in that then, but that actually whatever he has enough within him to be worthy of the big job, which I think is quite sweet. Matthew Waterhouse has a lot of hair, doesn't he? There's a lot of urgency to Tom Baker, isn't there? He's very good at driving the drama when necessary. Oh, I can hear some birds in the background. I stopped. We've got parakeets in our. A bit of handheld. Well, it looked handheld. Yeah, that looks handheld. Oh, that gives everything a little bit of a sense of eavesdropping. That's quite unusual, isn't it? Because the house style and indeed the TV style is largely to have these pedestal things. And I remember, when the Bill used a lot of handheld cameras, there's a sort of messiness to it that lends itself to, a modern day police procedural, but you sort of don't want in a costume drama or even a science fiction thing of this time, because everything else is so sort of theatrical. In a way, I think it would be quite jarring, especially on videotape. But that was which is why I suppose that particular shot stood out a little bit. I wonder what it would have been like if they'd been sort of bold enough to go, no, let's get cameras on shots. But they were pedestal cameras, weren't they? So I suppose they would have been. Yeah, but it would have been hard, if not impossible, to do. I don't know enough about the technology, but my feeling is we don't get that shot I just pointed out might not even have been handheld, but it was certainly the speed at which it moved, and it wasn't a clean. It was quite a jerky movement, but it wasn't so jerky that it looked like a bad movement. It seemed to add to the scene a little bit. I like this mixture of science and costume drama. That to me, I quite like it sometimes if I see a Shakespearean modern dress where nonetheless people have swords and things like that, and they manage to take the virtues of both. Like I like Nigel Neal because he takes the virtues of horror and the virtues of sci-fi and moulds them. I think somebody that takes the virtues of sort of costume drama and a period setting that gives us this rich dialogue and these rich characterizations, but that also has the bells and whistles and laser beams and all that of science fiction, I think is a really, when you can meld those two things together, I think that is getting the best of both worlds. And I think that's what this does. It has the big sort of sci-fi thing. Cassie's got her eyes painted on her lids, which is lost degraded creature. That's nice. Yeah, he's great. So I think you feel the losses for him because he's kind of identified himself as perhaps the shrewdest, which is again why I think it's a bit odd that he. I don't think he dies particularly well. They've got a thing about eyes, haven't they? It's a bit like in the war games when everyone gets killed, they sort of grab their eyes. Here, she used her eyes, got taken over and painted on her lids, and she shot him in the eyes. But it's not the best death. But again, that's the nature of multi-camera. And Yeah, and I like the fact that we have this suggestion that now that Cassia has the neck thing on, it makes the fact that she's working against her husband, who she's also working for, makes slightly more sense. I think we need that neck bracelet to go. So every time she does something that's really really evil, that's because she's too subjugated to the master's will. But I like that hint that she's sort of fighting against it. But I do think some of the shooting of her sort of face pulling is a little unfortunate. It's those sorts of bits that dominated for me when I went through my 2 decades of thinking that Keeper of Traken didn't quite work. It's those bits that I think in other hands might have just melded that theatrical with televisual to slightly better effect. But Seron, I think we feel the loss of. He's a good character played by a good actor, and that's the end of John Woodnutt in Doctor Who. I never had the pleasure, but I've spoken to a couple of people that interviewed him and had a great time in his company. I think somebody remembers walking through Newcastle. Who was it that somebody was telling me they walked through Newcastle with a slightly pissed John Woodnutt after a play? Again, it's the eyes thing as well, but painted on the lids. And I hadn't remembered that this was this is quite an unusual cliffhanger. And again, I like that because you've got the net, which is very sort of oldie worldy, but it's a laser net, so it sort of stuns them with the electrical charge or whatever. And I rather like this. And this is I'd not remembered this cliffhanger at all, and I definitely remembered the first one, and certainly the cliffhanger to episode 3, and indeed the end of episode 4. But I never quite remembered what the end of episode 2. But I think it's quite. It's like storytelling. It's like the end of a chapter of a book rather than a sort of traditional kill them now cliffhanger. And I find it all the more charming for that. So that's the end of Dennis Carey in this story. We don't see the Keeper again. He doesn't appear beyond episode 2. And Seron is gone. So that's the end of John Woodnutt, the mighty John Woodnutt, who, although I think he's good in this, his finest hour is definitely Broton and the Duke of Forgill, although he's also in episode 5 of Frontier in Space as the Draconian Emperor, and he's in Spearhead from Space as Hibbert. What a geezer. I never had the pleasure myself. I know he was also interviewed for that I Was a Doctor Who short that appeared before one of the episodes of Planet of the Daleks. I've not seen it, but a friend of mine has seen a take where some factotum off camera hands him a draconian mask. I think it says something like, "Can you say you are watching Doctor Who?" Or so, they basically ask him to say a thing with his mask on, and I've got a feeling he gamely does as well because he was a pro. But they didn't end up using any of it. But to me, that my friend who told me this story, and I can't remember what he got them. I think even if it was just my life at your command or whatever it was that they asked him to say, there was something. There was a certain amount of. It made for quite an embarrassing image, and I'm not describing it well because I can't remember exactly what they said, but I think there was a certain bathos about it, and I'm sure the dignity with which the old pro John Woodnutt conducted himself in the face of this rather sort of lame request. He'd probably gone on to talk about what fun it was to work on Doctor Who and modern television. Well, I say modern, but when it was then, modern television came on with all its hopelessness. But anyway, but they didn't even use any of his interview in that I Was a Doctor Who monster thing. But those rushes survived at that point. I tried to find the rushes because I was trying to find the Pat Gorman interview, and I was sent the interviews with almost everybody else, but not the Gorman ones and not the Woodnutt ones. So that gives me hope the Gorman ones might survive, because I know the Woodnutt ones did, because my friend saw them, but I couldn't trace them when I looked for them 5 or 6 years ago, but that was just me on Facebook. So I wonder if someone out there has the John Woodnutt outtakes or unused interview from I Was a Doctor Who Monster. I think we should see that at some point, and I'd love the Pat Gorman one because it's the only interview he ever did. But he's not in The Keeper of Traken, so we shall not discuss him because we will have plenty of opportunities to discuss him elsewhere. For some reason, is this the placeholder? The screen grab I have on my episode 2 of The Keeper of Traken is Sheila Ruskin with her eyes painted on her eyelids. But that's, the ingenuity of Doctor Who. There's a suggestion, isn't there, that the Master has his teeth painted on his lips as well, but I'm not sure I buy that. But we will see that later on because we don't know he's the Master yet. He is Melker. So what is my favourite thing about episode 2 of The Keeper of Traken? Well, still to me, the main thing about it is this sort of Trakenite society. So I can't repeat that. But within that, there is, as I say, the melding of science and costume drama, which I think largely, apart from the moments of theatricality that aren't quite pulled off, but I think television was more theatrical then, so it would have stood out less starkly, I would say. But I would still prefer the melding of theatricality and the televisual to be slightly smoother, shall we say? But nonetheless, I like the fact that one of the special things about Traken is that everyone's dressed like they're in a lovely costume drama, all rich and elegance and opulence, and Amy Roberts is the costume designer, and they are beautiful costumes. Tony Burrow is the set designer, and he's a fine set designer with, laser beams and, the source and whatever that is, and I think that's a nice design because it's got the sort of ornamental stuff around it, but it's a big ball of science fiction light in the middle. But it's not all jazzy and spacey. It's quite sort of, it's almost like, Victorian era science fiction in a way or whatever. I like that melding. I think that's clever use of the show's budget. That's clever use of the show's aesthetic. And I think it enables us to have the best of both worlds. BBC does costume drama very well. Doctor Who does science fiction as well as it can. And I think it's a smart ambition. I do like Amy Roberts' costumes, so I wonder if I need to choose those. I mean, they're all part of it, though, aren't they? The whole Traken thing. I do like the idea of rapport with the Keeper. Again, I suppose because it's unique to this story, but they don't get too bogged down in exactly what it is. There's not a big boring scene where they have to explain how it came about or what it works. I don't know exactly how it works, but it means there's a kind of this thing that you have to do to prove that you're worth it. So it speaks to the character of Seron. It speaks to the way the society works. It speaks to how Cassia's plan is going to work and how she overcomes things that get in the way of her plan. It speaks, as I say, to Seron's character that he actually proffers himself, and the fact that he ultimately proves to be what we know, an honourable character who is blameless, but it nonetheless leads to his death, which then advances Cassia's plan. And sadly, I hope when the history of Traken is written, Traken's not long for this world, but that somebody actually doesn't, in Seron's obituary doesn't end with he entered rapport of the Keeper and was proved unworthy, because that's how it looks, isn't it, to Luvic and Katura. So I dislike the fact that Seron actually gets an inaccurate obituary in the eyes of his peers, because actually he was proved to be fine all along, but he had to look like he'd not achieved rapport with the Keeper in order for Cassia to get him out of the way and advance her plans. I do like that idea. I like the cliffhanger actually as well. I think that's quite but I think I like that more in retrospect, that it's a sort of charming grace note rather than something that would have me racing back next week. And the fact that I don't remember it as a kid when I do remember other bits of this so profoundly. I like the lighting of the nighttime scenes. I do like the character of Neiman. I like the word hugger mugger. Oh, now I think it's between the idea of rapport with the keeper. But I remember when I got this years and years and years ago, when I first got a sort of bootleg of it or whatever, I remember just being delighted by the word hugger. That the word hugger, I knew it. I knew of it. I'd obviously come across it in literature somewhere. But it is a wonderful, wonderful word, and it is the only time it's used in Doctor Who. And it just fits the story, and it fits the dialogue. And the only other time I've encountered hugger mugger is Shakespeare, my other great love. So of course, if one reminds me of the other, it's Claudius in Hamlet says, "For good Polonius' death, and we have done but greenly in hugger mugger to inter him." So they have secretly buried Polonius to hide the fact that he's been stabbed behind an arras by Hamlet. So that's I like that. So yes, it means, doesn't it? It means it means to do something secretly. In fact, let's give you the dictionary definition. So, this is interesting because it has two meanings. I've only ever thought of it, of course, in the Doctor Who way, because it's in the way that a lot of, I still think of xenophobia as being fear of the unknown, but it's actually fear of foreigners. It's a bit more on the nose than fear of the unknown, but I was taught by Doctor Who books that xenophobia meant fear of the unknown. Because of, the Daleks are xenophobic. Now, of course, when everybody calls everybody racist, it's gone pretty much the other way. But it was deemed too on the nose, wasn't it, to say xenophobic was fear of foreigners? So we go the unknown. We'll make it a bit less clear. But hugger mugger here, the second. On the online dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary, the second meaning is the keeper of Traken / Doctor Who meaning secret, clandestine. There was no longer the hugger mugger anecdote or any juicy elbow gripping gossip. So yes, secret or clandestine. He declared war on hugger mugger and conspiracy, clandestine deals sealed in back rooms. So, but the first one is confused and disorderly. So you could use it a spirit of careless frivolity where all was hugger mugger, or disorder and confusion, the vast hugger mugger of alleys. I didn't know it had two meanings, so I have just learnt something. This is Doctor Who now at its most Reithian. Well, not Doctor Who at its most happy times and places at its most Reithian. Early 16th century is where it comes from, in sense 2 of the noun, possibly related to huddle and to dialect, mucker, hoard money, conceal. This is one of a number of familiar formulations from late Middle English to the 16th century, including hucker mucker and hudder mudder. Hello mudder, we are hudder mudder. In the basic sense of secrecy and concealment. So yes, the origin is English huddle and mucker. Huddle and mucker becomes hucker mucker, hudder mudder, and eventually hugger mugger in the 16th century. 1520s, one of a number of similar sounding reduplicated words in use around this time. Yes, old hugger mugger, secretly, stealthily, or furtively. So I do I choose that? Do I just choose a word? Sometimes, it seems to me a bit slightly unfair on the rest of the Keeper of Traken to go, the best thing about the whole episode is a word. But I just remember, I'd not remembered it, obviously, at the time. I didn't remember much dialogue from the time. But revisiting it, just being charmed by the fact that it had this word that seemed to be sort of, from theatre, but from quality theatre, and obviously, Old English, and anything that gets you talking about words. I think words etymology is fascinating, and I love delving into where words come from, and I love it when somebody uses a word that I might not necessarily know, but can kind of glean from what they say what that word means. That can sometimes lead us into trouble, as an erstwhile colleague of mine might let you know. But I am charmed by Hugger Mugger, but I do like the idea of rapport with the keeper. Do I choose Hugger Mugger, or do I choose a rapport with the keeper? It's one of those things, with an honourable mentions to Neiman, who might still get chosen, that nighttime lighting, and Amy Roberts' costumes. They are kind of part and parcel of the Traken thing, but they might get... I mean, Nissa's costume, Nissa's dress, and that lovely burgundy that everybody's in. But no. Oh, I'm going to go for Hugger Mugger. I like Hugger Mugger. I just like the fact that this is the only Doctor Who story with the word Hugger Mugger in it. And it speaks to how there are words I know only because of Doctor Who. And there are words from Doctor Who that I would spot in Shakespeare, which made me... I do love Shakespeare, but probably my gateway to Shakespeare was... either words or actually, of course, with me, everything starts with actors. It was actors in Shakespeare plays who'd also been in Doctor Who. But I liked it when, I discovered that certain Doctor Who lines, a very palpable hit, were Shakespeare lines, or vice versa. In fact, I probably knew Hamlet well enough to know, because it's in Death to the Daleks, isn't it? As well as, but I think when I saw it in Silver Nemesis, I already knew that was Hamlet again. But there are certain words and phrases that obviously are shared by Doctor Who and Shakespeare, and we're people, or I'll speak for us all. We're people who like to see the patterns in things. We like the things that we like being reflected in other things, especially if they're things as marvellous as Shakespeare, who is the greatest dramatist and linguist and philosopher and all sorts of other things who ever lived, and speaks to us still after all this time, and does so occasionally using really brilliant words. And he a lot of our words we can trace back to him and not before, and a lot of our phrases too find their genesis in the works of William Shakespeare. So the fact that Doctor Who sends us scurrying back to Shakespeare, or just gives us that little thing that we just acknowledge, we're going, oh okay, yeah. It speaks to it, so it's more than just the word Hugger Mugger. It's what that represents, and indeed the person who says it, because it is John Woodnutt's last appearance in Doctor Who, and he was magnificent. So I am going to, I suspect, Tom, musician, and intellectual, learned man. Educated man, is probably not going to choose the word Hugger Mugger, is he? Let us see what Dr. Tom, has chosen about episode 2 of The Keeper of Traken.
Bonus. Did anybody else notice that the keeper is Dennis Carey, who at this point had played Professor Chronotis in Sharda and would go on to play the Borad in Timelash? Episode 2. The next thing to praise are two of the guest performances. Sheila Ruskin plays Cassia between Lady Macbeth and Juliet, consumed by ambition, but part of a romance that will leave her dead. Anthony Ainley is also silky and subtle as Trimas, making what comes later in the story all the more shocking. So, thumbs up to the actors.
Oh, well, first up, he gave us a bonus for episode 1, which, of course, I didn't know, because I thought he got to the end of episode 1 when I was doing episode 1, so I stopped, because I can't listen ahead, because that would be spoilerific. So, yes, Dennis Carey did indeed play Professor Chronotis, and was, well, strictly speaking, he plays Old Man in Timelash, who is an avatar for the Borad, but he's credited as Old Man. But I'll let that pass, Tom, because I know what you meant, and that's all communication is really about. So our differing phraseologies do not matter. Pedants of Doctor Who discourse, take note. He said, actually, being a pedant of Doctor Who discourse in order to prove that he's not a pedant of Doctor Who discourse. I think there are certain laws under which I should be executable. Anyway, his thing for episode 2, well, he wasn't going to choose Hugger Mugger, but I wasn't going to choose what he chose. I'm Anthony Ainley, I'm sure we will talk about, and it is fascinating seeing him play Tremas, which he does very well. But I wouldn't have chosen Sheila Ruskin, although I adored the way that Tom put it, that she's somewhere between Juliet and Lady Macbeth. But I think a sort of slightly shonky rep Juliet or Lady Macbeth, even though I do think Sheila Ruskin is a fine actress. I don't think bits of what she does work here. So much as I like the character, much as I like bits of her performance, there are too many sort of slightly shonky moments that kind of damage it for me, and seeing as I'm prone to choose actors all of the time, I mean, I would just always choose the guest actors probably most of the time because they're a big area of fascination for me. It has to be under exceptional circumstances or sometimes desperation where I would choose one, but I would never, I don't think, choose one where I didn't think where I thought there were chinks in the armour of the performance. And I do think some of those sort of possessed close-ups or are unfortunate, and that fall in particular with what she does with the hand gestures to the eyes and that collapse, I think are I think they're just a bit too stagey and they don't quite work. So I wouldn't have chosen those things, but I adored the way that Dr. Tom phrased them. But no, I chose the word hugger mugger. So here I am in my little cabinet, secretly, clandestinely recording my thoughts on The Keeper of Traken Part 2. So Tom was never going to be in accord with me because what I'm doing down here is very, very secretive indeed. Between you and I, general listener, I'm conducting myself in a very hugger mugger fashion. Until next time. Thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Dr. Tom Attah, who you can find on Twitter at Tom Attah. I'm grateful to Tom and to the patrons who make this podcast possible, and they include John Hancock, William Haynes, Aaron Gullias, Angus Gulliver, Paul J. Guest, Paul Greaves, Graham, I don't know if your surname, Graham, you're Graeme, James Gould, Lisa Gledhill, Charles Gears, David Gillespie Pratt, David Gates, Matt Foy, Neb Fountain, Philip Fitchett, Mark Findlay Smith, Fleet Boy, Simon Farker, Bill Evanson, Jonathan Evans, Patrick Emery, Andrew Egan, Jeff Edwards, Andrew East, Drew, another no surname, Sean Ditchfield, Tim Dickinson, Ian Dean, Shanti Day, Robert Davies, Hugh Davies, Chris Davies, Ben Cowdell, Leslie Coots, and Matt Corner. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you too would like to become a patron of these podcasts, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month you get advance releases, you get bonus material including twice a month, sometimes AMAs, Ask Me Anythings. They're quite fun and there's got a bit of community surrounding them now as well. You are ahead with Happy Times and Places. You're also ahead with Indefinable Magic and Too Much Information, the other podcasts in this range, and also you get an exclusive podcast all to yourself called Far Too Much Information, and there are looks behind the scenes at the making ofs that I do for the Blu-ray range, and occasionally the odd interview from the archives as well, with extended or previously unreleased material. Lots of stuff there for as little as £3 a month, and you get 10% discount if you join for a year in one go. That's patreon.com/Toby Haydock. You can also, instead of being committed to a monthly donation, just do a drive-by, throw some coins into the hat via the medium of cyberspace's Ko-fi, which is Ko-fi, kofi.com/Toby Haydoke, where if I sound particularly hungry or have done something you particularly like, you can just you can throw in a one-off donation that pretends to be cyber coffee. If the financial thing is not the route you want to travel, and I totally understand that, times are tough for everybody, and I'm grateful to you simply for listening. What you can do is go to wherever you get these, YouTube, Apple, iTunes, Bean, Spotify, like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star reviews, and a few lines as well saying what you like about these. That just enables more people to be aware of what goes on in this little corner of cyberspace, and it costs you nothing but a little bit of your time, which I would nonetheless be grateful to you for spending on my behalf. I'm on all the social media, Twitter at Haydoke Podcasts and at Toby Haydoke. I've got a Facebook page and also on Instagram at toby.haydoke. And my comedy club, Excess Malarkey, is at Excess Malarkey, and that is every Tuesday in Manchester. Do come along if you're passing through. Well, a little peek behind the curtain. I'm speaking very quickly because it's a bit like the Celestial Toymaker DVD commentary, Blu-ray commentary, or DVD. No, it's DVD, wasn't it? The animation commentary all over again, where during episode 4, my battery was going further and further down. I'm currently on 4%, and when I started the closing credits, I was on about 10%. So I don't want to lose this entire recording. So the post-credits thing hit me here is saying it's not going to be very much because whereas at the end of episode 2 of Keeper of Traken, Melka says, it's only the beginning. This is very, very close to the end, and it could ruin everything. So the countdown has started, and I really need to save this and also work out what the heck is wrong with my wires and or plug, because they were working earlier. I don't know what's going on. This is why this house is like a costume drama with some slightly inefficient sci-fi trappings, so wholly appropriate. But anyway, I'm going to go and manipulate my source.